Alright guys, it's Mike's and welcome back to the Let's Talk About series. The series where I talk about the history of the gear set through the various patches right up until now. I will also talk about the pros and the cons, things I like, things I don't, and finally offer my suggestions on how to create a better, more fun, more balanced experience for as many players as humanly possible. So let's get right into it. Predator's Mark, introduced in 1.2 alongside Final Measure, Hunter's Faith and Lone Star. It was immediately recognised as the best gear set of the bunch. Hunter's Faith, no one really knew or figured out how it worked, so it was never really used. Final Measure was seen as a gear set that worked for the clear sky and was seldom used in PvP as players really hadn't quite got to grips with using grenades. Lone Star was pretty much, like I said in my previous video, only used to cheese the restocking system for more ammo. And finally, the topic of this video, Predator's Mark. Predator's Mark quickly became my favourite gear set. I used to run 2 sentry for the headshot damage and 4 pred, because back in those days, in 1.2, headshot damage was still relevant. It also had the great utility of preventing players from running, as the bleed used to slow you down considerably in the olden times, much more so than it does so today. Along came 1.3, and the G36 was released, and I used to use the same gear set with the G36, because back then that gun had absurdly high base damage compared to the other assault rifles, and was pretty much at the time the only assault rifle worth running. And it was a great combination, because you had the long range and you had the damage from Predator's Mark applying to the G36, as with the other SMGs such as the AUG, which we were still using at the time. This was of course before the shotgun meta settled in, because after that we all knew what happened with 1.3. However, deemed too powerful in 1.3 for some weird reason, the bleed damage was reduced from 100% to 50%. I don't think this was necessary, as back then any first aid would automatically cleanse you, and for the use of the broken first aid at the time, allowing you to run in and out and triage, bringing the first aid back much quicker than what would have been possible otherwise. The bleed damage didn't really last very long. I mean, it affected, you could put someone on bleed when they were running away, but in an actual fight, people were just running in and out of triage, and it wouldn't really do very much. So nerfing it going into 1.4 or 1.5 didn't really make much sense at all, and allowed for Alpha Bridge in 1.5 to take the lead. After this nerf, Predator took the backseat and was a relatively underpowered gear set. Despite this, I still made it work in 1.7, even went as far as to make a build video for it. Back in those days, Adept was a thing, so it was pretty much an Adept focused build. 1.7 had to come to an end, and before the end there was a 1.8 PTS. So I played that, got in one morning into a lobby of pretty high tier players. I looked around and there were people the kind of players who run servers in those days and don't often come up against each other. And it was just a complete shit show. I mean, it was just 10k stamina nomads. Because of the nomad buff, people were just testing things out in an absurd way. Little did we know that that absurd way was to become the norm. Predator's Mark was obviously being tested. It just turned into a Baroque police session. It was really, really awful PvP. Nobody liked it. Every single player was bitching about the ADS heal nerf and pred as well. We all of course had the house, and the house was even more OP because it had 25% for the cards and not 20%, even though the 20% these days is still too powerful. But it is what it is. We all knew that if that state of the game carried over into the live game, the game would be, well, fucked. We were right about that, because 1.8 launched and it was pretty fun at first. Predator was yet to come out for a week. It was basically open season. It was just like 1.7. We're just smashing people left, right and centre with I got my house on day 1. I already had Striker. Striker had been buffed to +2 -1. Fuck knows why. Well, I thought that at first, but as time went on, one by one, our enemies turned to Pred and Nomad from other gear sets that previously were effective but took skill. And so we promptly realised that we were no longer fighting players, but we were fighting gear sets. And in order to maintain dominating, I pretty much used Striker exclusively. It was the only way to deal with the bullshit. And then in January, I moved to Chile temporarily. Temporarily turned to a little more than temporary. And for those of you who don't know, the closest servers are in the US, Texas in California to be precise, resulting in 150 ping, best case scenario. And the reason I'm telling you this is, however bad pred was on a sub 50 ping, which is what I was mostly connected to in Europe, it was considerably worse on 150 plus ping. I was dying to pred the moment I noticed I was on bleed. It was then I truly realised how broken that gear set was. A gear set that deals insane amounts of almost uncounterable, incredibly easy to proc bleed. And the best way to deal with this absurdly high damage is to spec into max stamina, or almost max stamina. 9k, really? And then on top of that, 1.8 also introduced the most OP gun the game has had for, I mean, a very long time. And it comes with an RNG talent that increases damage even further. Oh, but it's okay, it's only for half the mag, so it balances out for 10%, and that's pretty normal, right? Yeah, but no, because you only need 10 bullets to proc it, and 10 bullets, which pre-Rogue 2.0, you had to be careful to hit. You have to watch out. If you wanted to hit that rogue and there were other people in the way, you had to really be careful. You had to get in the fight. But now with Rogue 2.0, you don't need to watch your shot. All you have to do is spray into the crowd and find a solo player. If you're fighting multiple players, it gets a little bit more difficult. This is true. But to counter that, they just chuck on a shock turret. I mean, it's really bad. I mean, you're dealing 50k white numbers or regular bleeds, and then you're hitting over 100k, 120k crits on a regular. And on my new 150 ping, this was awful. I promptly quit the game about 2 weeks into my 150 ping connection, and I played PUBG instead. So about a month passed, having only logged in a couple of times to see if the rogue experience had changed, but of course it hadn't, because sometimes you play at different times of day and you get different kinds of players. I don't know why, well, I kind of do know why this is. It's because you have younger players in the afternoon, evening, and then you have the older players at evening, nighttime. The experience was basically rogue players congregating in teams of unkillable nomads, fronting the line for the pred pussies hiding behind. Some people would call that team synergy, or I call it a disgrace. The whole thing was just plain awful. So let's move on to the current day. How is Predator's Mark now? Well, it's much more balanced for sure. The Immunizer does its job properly. Energy bars not only cleanse but keep you immune the whole time, although that time is too short, about 10 seconds I believe. And on console it's definitely not always a viable alternative because they never improved the clunky mechanic behind it, although I do have my suggestions for that, which will come in another video. Now while I agree with the drop and pop nerf in and of itself, the great implications imply that Predator's Mark is to get a buff, because if the guy using the hitbox is not getting his heal immediately, when sometimes you need it, Predator's Mark gets a buff, and it's not a gear set that deserves to be buffed. It is already absurd. It is already broken in many, many different ways. So let's go through some of the absurdities of Predator's Mark. In number 1, the huge jump in effectiveness from 6k to 9k. I mean, why would you ever use Predator's Mark at 6k with 80% bleed damage when you can use it at 9k and get 215%? Gear set should not come as a result of direct investment into a stat which does not correlate with it. You either should be investing into firearms to get a higher bleed damage, or perhaps a mix of both, which is my suggestion, which I will get to in a minute. This is a fundamental flaw which Striker also had, and still has, but Striker is not so relevant this patch. Number 2, the ability to crit. Not only do we have an absurdly high bleed value at almost max stamina, an element of RNG is introduced completely out of anybody's control. So instead of getting hit by a 50k regular predictable bleed, there is a 50-60% chance that the first bleed will hit for 120 or more. And this often results in instant death, because sometimes you have already been worked down, maybe a half a bar, you get hit by the pred player, that's another bar, and then the crit bleed hits you for what, a bar, even more, a bar and a half if you're running medium to lowish toughness. So you're completely demolishing low toughness builds because of a no skill build, forcing everyone to run high stamina, and it's just not sustainable. It's not sustainable. Number 3, the playstyle it promotes. Just about every other pred player you come across couples the already easy to proc bleed with a shock turret, because damn, isn't it hard to hit one player with 10 bullets without, switching targets. You've got to stick them to the ground for a couple of seconds. Oh my god. It's just so cancerous. Nobody likes the shock turret. It is awful. The flame turret and the pulse turret, not so bad. But the shock turret, you should never ever have the ability to stick somebody in place. Although we know that's already coming in Division 2 with the riot foam gun. We'll see how that plays out. And the other part of it is it promotes a semi-passive playstyle whereby they proc bleed and then avoid PvP like the plague, even though they're the ones dishing out the plague, until it's time for another proc. Which is all too easy when they have an army of Nomad constantly present, right there in front of you, ready to save you and get in the way, with its absolute no skill sustain, 3 extra lives, mitigation for death. I mean, it's just backward thinking. Number 4, and this is a long one, the damage structure. I'm going to go deep into the numbers here, so listen out. If you haven't already noticed, the sheer values of bleed are off the chart. We go from a reasonably weak 50% at less than 3k stamina to a bleed damage at 65 at 3k stamina. Where we hit the 6k stamina mark, we get 80%, and it's now starting to look like we're getting some bleed damage. 9k brings that up to 95%, almost the value which it used to be for the 4-piece back in the day. But this is a classified. Where's the extra damage? If you've got to give it more damage, right? Yes, that's right. From 6k stamina to 9k stamina, we get an absurd 267% bleed difference. I mean, it's going from 80% to 215%. That is times 2.67. I mean, just think of that. I mean, by gaining more stamina, more health, more effective toughness, you get more damage. That's backwards. I mean, come on, guys. How can you do this? And then, that's not even including the classified critical hits which you get, which come at a common value of 130% crit damage. Some people will have it a little higher, 136. I think that might be the max. But this further multiplies the damage yet again. And it doesn't stop there, because there's one more thing I forgot to mention. I haven't forgot, I'm just waiting. Something which theoretically has the potential to wipe the entire server. Now, of course, that will never happen, because nothing has ever come close to this other than perhaps the Soul Sticky. But that's shrapnel, because not only can you bleed target for 280% of your bullet damage, it can spread to nearby enemies at a 30% rate. Well, if you're fighting a 4-man, that's almost a certain, it's almost certainly you're going to hit one more player, which again doubles your bleed damage from 280 to 560%. You are dealing 560% damage on a regular basis by speccing into 9k stam. It doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. Oh, but you can counter it, right? Yeah, that's true, but only really in a team. I mean, they've forced you to play in a team. The box nerf ensured that a solo player has no chance to counter the stupid bleed, unless of course you run Nomad. Again, going back to the awful meta that this is. This is a great game, right? I mean, I could go on about this shit all day, but let me instead put forth my proposal to fix this retard-proof gear set so it remains relevant, but a set that rewards skill. So, for the 2-piece I propose, the same as usual, reload speed is absolutely fine, no problem whatsoever. For the 3-piece, the SMG AR damage at 8%, again, absolutely no issues whatsoever. The 4-piece, 50%, I actually think it's somewhat weak. If you have any suggestions for the 4-piece, please put them forth, but I will just leave it right there. For the 5-piece, this is where we change things. I would actually up the damage from 8% to 12%, just like Lone Star, because when you consider Ninja Bike being a thing, going from a 4-piece to a 5-piece, I mean, you can get the 4-piece with 3 pieces, yet you can only get a 5-piece with 5 pieces, so you're investing 2 pieces to get that. Yes, it's not always, it's not exactly like that, but it kind of is, right? So Alpha Bridge is very worth going for it, Lone Star is worth going for it, Nomad is worth going for it in a team, and so should Predator's Mark. So 12% I propose here for a total of 20% damage, which is quite a lot because we're trying to turn this build from a bleed set to one that it benefits from bleed, not to be only about the bleed. For the 6-piece, no crits whatsoever, no RNG bollocks, no. We introduce a system like Alpha Bridge, but instead of just firearms or stamina or between all of them, it's going to be firearms and stamina. So if the more equal they are, you will get 100% bleed damage. Doesn't seem like very much, but there's more. Targets that are bleeding, you deal 15% more damage to. So that whether they bleed from a friendly sticky bomb, you blow up a canister, you blow a grenade, or seeker mines, you're going to deal 15% more damage. So it's just like Firecrest in a sense. So it's going to promote you by putting a player on bleed and then actually continue to fight that player while they're bleeding for the next bleed. I'm also going to make this bleed be only cleansable by medkit use or during an energy bar. Because the damage is not going to be absurdly stupid, but the damage needs to be relevant, and we're going to make it uncounterable, because it's Predator's Mark, it needs to be dangerous, but we don't want absurdly off-the-chart damage. Shrapnel will still work, and the reason why we don't want anything to counter this bleed is what we're going to do is we're going to free up the slot. We're going to not be forced to run the box, because being forced to run the box is just not good. It's not good, man. What happened to the hybrid builds? What happened to the hybrid builds? You have to run a box now, but you're running a box in a skill build, it doesn't work. We could be running skill build, solo build, sustain, firearms, lowish, medium stamina, and then good electronics to give yourself a good heal. And if you're going to run yourself a heal, you need to invest in something worth investing with a skill power, and a box just isn't it. The pulse is a very good option for solo. It gives you the damage required to kill people quickly, the situational awareness to plan your attack, and then you need the first aid to give you that constant heal. With a 50% skill haste, this could be such a great build, but it's completely just not. It doesn't work because Predator's Mark is a thing, and it takes no fucking skill at all. So thank you guys for watching. We're going to wrap things up here. If I've missed anything out, please point it out. If you have your own suggestions, I want to hear yours. I even had another alternative 6-piece where instead of the extra damage, it was like health packs that the enemy would drop. Every time they bleed for a certain amount, they would drop health packs, like an ammo drop on the floor, and when you're fighting you can like walk over to it. It's like health on kill, but it drops on bleed damage rather than kill damage, and you can go and pick it up whenever you want. So you could just stack them on the ground, and then when you need health, just go run over them. Seems pretty cool. Like, people drop blood, you use that blood to, I don't know. Let's not get into the lore of it all. But thank you guys for watching. That's gonna be it. In a bit, guys. In a bit.